Thank you, Ebru, for the invitation. And it's so much fun to work together. And I think that's really what the denim industry represents, is how we can collaborate and still have fun at the same time and make beautiful products. But while we think about all of that, we also have to look at the impact. And I think this is where we're really being challenged as an industry. And it was interesting. I was meeting with some customers earlier this month, and they said, it was a brand, and they said, all of these challenges around sustainability, we are the ones who've been building that up. Buy more seasons, more drops, more, sales, everything, more. And yet we're asking the supply chain to fix this problem. And so that's really where I see that we need to come together. And so Ebru and I, we're talking about this over the holidays, and said, there are a couple of topics that the industry needs to know a little more about. And we were tossing around some of those ideas, and one was around biodegradability and compostability. Because it's no longer that you have a garment and you throw it away, because where is away anymore? We see the effects of all of the waste, and so it's not going away. And so we have to be more responsible in what we're developing, in what you're designing, and where that falls. And so the whole concept around circularity has gained so much momentum in the market. I know that several of your companies are involved in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the denim redesign. So that's one initiative that's happening. But, I feel that when I'm speaking with members of the denim community, that there needs to be some clarification around this disposal and end of use, right? Because it's never really an end of life. So, there was actually this video that I watched a couple of years ago.
What do you think when you hear the word polyester? 70s leisure suits? Sweaty smelling dress shirts? That's what polyester used to be. These days, everybody wears it. Yoga pants, fleeces, even underwear. All made from synthetic fabrics like polyester. More polyester means more demand for the stuff used to make polyester. But you don't have to use new stuff to make it. Some companies are making polyester out of old stuff. Plastic bottles, in fact. Every day, the world throws away billions and billions of plastic bottles. That's a problem. Of course, the real solution is that we all use less plastic. But it's cool that even while we work to reduce plastic, some companies are turning trash into stuff we actually like. Drink it, drop it in the bin, take it to a recycling factory, chop it up, weave it, wear it, wash it, wear it again, wash it again. Seems like a great solution, right? But darn, when we look closer, there are some real problems with this. The big problem is that some people might be encouraged to use more disposable plastic if they think it's being recycled safely. But there's also a little problem, a micro problem that's adding up to one big mess. Every time we wash synthetic fabrics, whether they're made from recycled bottles or brand new materials, super tiny pieces of plastic, called microfibers, wash off and flow down the drain. Up to hundreds of thousands each wash. The older our clothes get, the worse the problem can become. Yikes! These fibers are so tiny, water treatment plants don't catch them all, so they wind up in rivers, lakes, and even the ocean. When they reach the ocean, they act like sponges, sucking up other pollutants around them. They're like little toxic bombs full of motor oil, pesticides, and industrial chemicals that end up in the bellies of fish and eventually in the bellies of us. It's gross. It's already estimated there are 1.4 million trillion in our oceans. That's like 200 million microfibers for every person on the planet. These are some serious downsides to what looked like a good solution. Time for these creative companies to go back to the drawing board. Because while we can wash our clothes less or avoid buying synthetic clothing, we can't solve the problem without them. And if we want these companies to make it a top priority, they need to hear from you. Let's find a real solution to make our clothes safe for the environment, safe for the ocean, and safe for us.
So I just thought, this video does bring to light, what do we need to do around, everything and the impact, not only when the consumer throws away their garment, but even during the consumer use and washing of it. And what we need to do then, even though we're in the denim industry, and we look at the fact that we use primarily cotton, we are using more multi-fiber blends, and so we need to look at things responsibly. And I think this overall issue around marine pollution is something that we hear more and more about. There were even headlines last week in the papers, I think you guys even covered it too on Sourcing Journal, around that there's microplastics in the air and what we're breathing. So it's not just around what is in marine pollution, but it's also all around us. And so are we almost suffocating ourselves with our own consumerism and what we've been dealing with in the apparel industry? And, you know, I think when this was another instance of information that was put together of just how much plastic over a lifetime that we are consuming. And when you break it down, you know, at the end of your life, it's like 2 garbage pails full. I mean, this kind of information that now we have available is really shocking, and we need to really change. So the options that you have then for end of life for textiles, when we look at it, it comes down to landfill, incineration, recycling, and composting. So we know with recycling, there's some challenges. In the textile industry, if we look at the amount of waste that we have in textiles, only about 15% of textiles are actually being recycled. And in many cases, they're even being downcycled. So some of the take-back programs, and we see them, I think it's a great start, but we always have to question, where are those garments really going? Are they being used? Are they being shipped off and sold to another country? Are they being downcycled and put into dog beds and rags? Are they being used in insulation? So, you know, these are more of the questions that we have to really ask as not only designers and being a part of the apparel industry, but also just as consumers. Where is it all going? And I find that many of the programs aren't clear enough or transparent enough. And I think this is where the systems will come together, but it's going to take some time. When we look at landfill, you know, this is where we see that we continue to have more and more waste, and what are we doing about it? So actually, this was new information I just got this week, and I was on a panel at Tex World that was talking about advancing circularity and what we can do. This was actually from the New York Department of Sanitation, and they've been doing a lot in New York City. And I think because we're all here, it's kind of interesting to understand how much waste New York City is accumulating. One thing in New York Department of Sanitation did some work last year around circular cities. So if you're in an apartment building in New York City with more than 50 apartments, you can actually have a textile disposal right in your building. So they're trying to make it very convenient. You might have seen, like in the green market, they have take-back programs. But what really caught me on this chart is just how much in textile waste, which is 6%. And that's more than the national average. So I'm not sure if New Yorkers just, you know, don't have the time or space and small closets and they just keep throwing away more textiles. But it is very interesting to see and to know how we might be able to support that, whether it's through other take-back programs or developments that you're working on in your own company. And we can talk about that a little bit more. So not to give too much of a plug for the Department of Sanitation, but they do have different clothing drop-off centers. So Circular Cities is coming up the end of March, and they'll do a whole refashion program where they're trying to work with a lot of resale businesses here in New York, everyone from Housing Works to Goodwill. So I think, you know, we're starting to create those systems. A lot of the challenge is the collection and the sorting, because that still has to be done manually. And what was very interesting is Goodwill was also on this panel, and they have so much more textiles that's coming back that they have to actually open up another sorting center. So they have one in Queens, and they're opening another one in New Jersey. So back to talking about what happens to textiles. So talking about biodegradability and compostability. And the reason why I thought this was such a great topic for us to discuss today and dive a little deeper is, how many of you use that word biodegradability just when you talk about things or you think about it? You know, is that something you commonly, and you look for if somebody says, oh, it's biodegradable, and you think, well, okay, that's a good thing. You know, if I'm getting my coffee in the morning and they say that the lid is biodegradable, then that's okay. You feel a little better. But actually, the difference is very important between biodegradability and compostability. And that's what I want to dive a little deeper on. So biodegradability is actually a component of compostability. And so really we should be striving for compostable materials rather than just biodegradable. So it's kind of like, again, where we need to evolve. And so, I mean, I find it's just commonly misused and say, hey, my t-shirt's biodegradable and that's good enough, when actually we should be looking for compostability. So just to give you a little bit more on the background and the details and the facts behind it, biodegradable is that the product will break down under conditions. And I think, biodegradability is also important because when you look at marine pollution, like we just, talked about in the beginning, in marine conditions, it's biodegradability. You can't compost in marine because in composting, you need soil in order to do that. So there's various standards that are required and certain testing methods. And I think it's also important that there's a time limit placed on biodegradability because, yes, something might biodegrade, but we might be gone before it ever biodegrades. And so these are some of the questions that you need to start to ask when someone comes to you and says, well, this is a great material and it's biodegradable. You need to really come up with, that question of saying, well, how long will it take? And you see a lot of this coming on in the synthetic market where they're talking about biodegradable treatments or something topically that could be added, but how long is it going to take to really biodegrade? So the term biodegradable has no legal enforcement or definition. And so this is where we could even get into some greenwashing. So we have to be very aware of that. Compostable. As I mentioned, compostable means that products actually are biodegradable and that they add a benefit to the soil. So it's kind of giving you that one up, making it better than just going away and biodegrading. So it's environmentally preferred to use disposable products that are labeled compostable rather than just biodegradable. I think we'll start to see more of this coming on in the food industry before we catch up on the apparel side. So according to the FTC, products that are certified as compostable, all materials in the product or package will break down into or otherwise become a part of or usable compost. And this is where they break down over 1 to 4 months. So again, we can't have something that lingers and lives longer than we do. So in order to be compostable, these are the 4 criteria that it must meet. It must be biodegradable, it must be disintegratable, and it must not leave toxic residues in the soil. And this is very important because something could biodegrade, but it could have dyestuffs or other chemicals in it that could be harmful then to the soil. So this is where we want to avoid. It can't be that it's making it worse than when it started. And so with compostability, you're not leaving any toxic residue behind. And then there's also the plant germination rate of the soil must not be decreased. So I know this kind of gets a little scientific into our jobs, but it's important to know, and I'll show you some of the pictures behind it. So at Lenzing, we took 100% TENCEL Indigo shirt, so much like the one I'm wearing. And what we did was we went through the testing with it. Here's the approximate weight is 230 grams, and the independent testing was carried out in Belgium by OWS. So this is actually the shirt. Some of you might have seen, I did include these pictures in a presentation before at Transformers, but I think because this is just a common basic style, what happens to it over time? We prepared the test where you have to cut it up into smaller samples, and then after 4 weeks, we could see that it was starting to compost. After 8 weeks, we just have left, you can start to see that there's the sewing thread and the interfacing, and by 12 weeks, you were just left with the placket, cuffs, and some interfacing. So what does this mean to you? What do you think when you see this? Yeah, but you see, we need to do some improvements with our sewing thread and interfacing, right? And so this is where I think we're going to have to look, and it's a part of, what Ellen MacArthur is doing with the denim redesign, is it's not just looking at your fabric, but how are all of your materials, are they able to compost? So, I think while this is great, but we can definitely do better through the other materials as well. And what was left then was just showing this bit of the interfacing sewing threads and metal. And then, so that's just the part that it is biodegrading. But now we have to look at the eco-toxicity conclusions. And again, we have a lot of different abbreviations from our scientific periodic table of contents there that I don't even remember from science and chemistry class. But it's showing that, again, that you're not having any toxicity that's left. So these we compared in US, European, and Canadian standards. So actually then the second part of the test is that you can actually grow, you can grow plants from this soil that has been composted with the TENCEL shirt. So here you can see the difference between the two tests, and that we do have the compost and the test compost. So both are showing that there is growth of plants. And here it was a barley test that was done. So they can actually grow barley out of the compost of the TENCEL shirt. So it's sort of cool to see how it can go back into nature. Then I think right now in our industry, we look at how many certifications there are. Very confusing landscape. And you can buy a certification from anyone. Everyone can make up different certifications, so you have to be really aware of the valid certifications that are in the industry. I think at Artistic Milliners, you guys have done a great job of leading that with reputable certifications, and you have to understand the scorecard behind them. Whether it's something like Cradle to Cradle. In this case, for compostability and biodegradability, we work with Vincate in Europe. And this certification they have for both biodegradability and for compostability in land and marine conditions for biodegradability. So for our fibers, for TENCEL, Lyocell, and for Modal, we actually were using our fibers and had the certification for marine biodegradability 5-6 years ago because we sell so much into non-woven products too. So like flushable wipes and those types of products. So before it was even becoming an issue in the apparel industry, we had already been working through what some of those tests were. So we do have all of the certifications on the compostability and biodegradability, and we're able to pass these on. So this was in 2009, actually, that we started with some of the compostability, and they keep upgrading the tests too. So these are an example of all of the certifications that we have. That's just for the environmental side. We also have certifications for the wood pulp and source side of it, and then for product safety. So I think many of you know then from Lenzing, what we do is just manufacture the fiber. So this is all that we produce. We're a $2.2 billion company. We just make the fiber and we sell directly to yarn spinners, to companies like Artistic Milliners who do the spinning as well as the weaving and also for the garment finishing. So that's a little bit on certificates and regulations. So that just gives you an overview of what we have going back to Earth. And I wanted to just show you, if you could put the other video up again. So we had put this together because I feel, again, this biodegradability and compostability, the difference is something that the industry really needs to be aware of. And so I just put this together as a little reminder then of going back into nature, that are fibers and the information on the TENCEL shirt.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you. Thank you.